our number 10 spot we have royal fish. This is one law that came into existence because someone was feeling a little greedy. Since 1327 it has been decreed that all beached whales in the UK belong to the king or queen, and we can all thank Edward II for this one. In 1324 he passed a law defining whales, sturgeons, dolphins, and porpoises caught within 5 kilometers of the shore as royal fish. These fish collected a lot of money in medieval markets, and those who were wealthy wanted these fish for their special feasts and banquets. Of course, instead of purchasing them with your riches, what do? Well, you just make up an insane law so that you can steal them, of course. What's even crazier is that this law actually hasn't been repealed, and in 2004 there was a fisherman who caught a 10-foot sturgeon near Wales, and he actually had to ask Queen Elizabeth's permission to sell it. Apparently she told him that he could use the catch, quote, as he saw fit. In our number 9 spot today we have strange cows. This law is one that was repealed in 1974 because at one point, I'm sure this made a lot of sense, but surely by 1974 and especially by now, it is simply just hilarious. This law is from Texas and it stated that whoever, without the consent of the owner, shall take up, use, or milk any cow not his own, faced a $10 fine. How weirdly specific. There was a law and a specific amount of a fine set up just for milking a stranger's cow. I mean, I feel like I understand why this one is illegal because how strange is it to just milk someone else's cow? A little intrusive if you ask me, to be honest. Of course, the only reason you'd be milking someone else's cow would be to steal the milk, and that is still rude to do now, but back in the day that could have had much heavier implications. Although that specific law was repealed, there is still a law in Texas that is in regards to the same sort of thing. It is still illegal to milk someone else's cow without permission, but now you'll be charged with theft and trespassing instead of a flat $10 rate. Also, who wants to be the weirdo stealing milk straight from a cow? In our number 8 spot today we have cold feet. Okay, apparently since 19th century France it's been legal to marry a dead person. Yeah, had to cut right to the chase with this one because beating around the bush simply just didn't seem right. Also known as necromancy, this law dates back to times when being born out of wedlock was a big no-no. So, say if your husband was to be out at war while you were pregnant and he ended up passing away in the war, this law would help to ensure that your child was born from within a marriage. The consent of the person who passed away could either be given by their family or if there was an existing engagement before they passed. This law still does actually exist in a way, with the most current form coming in 1959 after a terrible incident where a dam burst and 423 people lost their lives. One of the most recent examples of this was in 2017 when someone's partner was killed in a terror attack and he was still able to marry his partner posthumously. While this law sounded a little weird in the beginning, I am glad to know that it had some practical and important uses. In our number 7 spot today we have no fun. Since 1966 in Victoria, Australia, it has been illegal to fly a kite in a public space if it bothers someone else. You actually can't even play a game in a public space if it's gonna annoy someone else. I really hope you don't have a Karen in the neighborhood, I guess, or no jump rope for you. This was listed as a part of the Summary Offences Act, but it's crazy that this is something that came into effect as recently as 1966 and not hundreds of years ago. It just seems like such a random rule to instate. And it was way more popular to see these kinds of no fun laws in legislation from centuries ago. Or footloose, I guess. Anyways, all of this aside, I don't think that there are many Aussies who will be upset if you choose to fly a kite on a nice breezy day. In our number 6 spot today we have no UFO parking. After a man in this French winemaking town reported seeing aliens leave in a cigar-shaped UFO, the town of Châteauneuf-du-Pape made this law as follows. Article 1. The overflight, the landing, and the takeoff of aircraft known as flying saucers or flying cigars, whatever their nationality is, are prohibited on the territory of the community. Article 2. Any aircraft known as flying saucer or flying cigar which should land on the territory of the community will be immediately held in custody. Article 3. The forest officer and the city policeman are in charge, each one in what relates to him, of the execution of this decree. Not only is this law hilarious, but it's also super effective because they haven't seen any aliens or UFOs since it was passed in 1954. I really do respect them for doing what they can to protect their vineyards, however, but maybe the aliens just want a little wine too. In our number 5 spot today we have no gum. You know when some people choose to do something wrong and then it ruins things for everyone who wasn't doing the wrong thing? Yeah, that's what happened in Singapore, and now no one can chew gum. There were some people who decided to try and mess with the mass rapid transit system, and they used chewing gum to do it. These people ended up costing the Housing and Development Board $150,000 a year just to clean up this gum, so in 1992 they banned it. They banned all gum substances, and so anyone importing, selling, or making gum can potentially face fines or even jail time. In 2004, however, there was an exception made for those who needed gum for therapeutic, dental, or nicotine chewing gum reasons, and those can be bought from a doctor or pharmacist. I wonder if there's an underground gum ring in Singapore now. In our number 4 spot today we have no high heels. This law is a strange one, but it will be no problem for the overpacker in your life. If you're taking a trip to Greece anytime soon, make sure you don't pack only high heels, because if you do, then you won't be able to visit the Acropolis. That's right, in 2009 the country banned wearing high heels there. I really don't know why anyone would want to walk around there in high heels. I mean, ruins and dirt don't exactly make me scream stilettos, but clearly it was happening enough that a rule needed to be made. This rule, although seemingly random, is actually important. As it turns out, people's sharp shoes may have been damaging the site, and truly that's just not worth it. The ruins are 2,500 years old, so at this point I feel like we can throw on a pair of Vans and call it a day. No one needs to wear black tie attire when visiting a historical site. Like, sorry I forgot my ball gown, can I still visit Göbekli Tepe? That was a dumb joke. In our number 3 spot today we have Jellicle cats. In 1939, in what was called, quote, a war measure to alleviate mental strain upon the populace, the town of French Lick Springs, Indiana passed a law that required all black cats to wear bells on Friday the 13th. This would make sure that anyone who heard a cat's bell was able to avoid crossing their path and having bad luck. I honestly feel like I should be making this up, but it's true. I guess I can really appreciate them doing what they can to alleviate the stressors in the lives of those who are having to live through a world war, but it just seems like there's so many other way more stressful parts of a war than black cats on one specific day. Like, imagine if we were entering World War III and we were like, nuclear bunkers, and the government was like, no, but you don't have to worry about black cats anymore. In our number 2 spot today we have Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh Bear is a well-known and loved animated figure, but he doesn't wear pants, and apparently a pantsless bear is upsetting to some people. Because of this weird issue, there's apparently a law in Poland that has banned Winnie the Pooh from playgrounds and schools. I mean, wait till they hear about all the pantsless and shirtless bears that are just walking around outside. I'm not sure how they'll be able to keep it together. I'm not exactly sure how far this one can be taken. I mean, if your kid has a Winnie the Pooh sticker, are they gonna be sent to jail? Probably not. I mean, even a fine seems a little ridiculous though, right? I don't know. I guess there's a reason I don't make laws. Winnie the Pooh is just a little too risque these days, I guess. In our number 1 spot today we have Footloose. Since we mentioned it all the way back at number 7, let's talk about a very real sort of Footloose situation. This law was instituted in Japan and was enacted in 1948 while US soldiers were occupying. Basically, the idea behind it was to stop Americans from corrupting the citizens of Japan, and basically dancing in a club after midnight was banned. It is said that dance halls often used to be fronts for other businesses during this time when the nation was poverty stricken. The activity was considered just too sinful, but now, since Japan is one of the largest economies in the world with a high standard of living and a vibrant nightlife, the ban was finally lifted in 2015. There is still a rule around post-midnight dancing though, it's just slightly more relaxed. You can dance, but once the clock strikes midnight, you need to be doing it in a well-lit room. I'm not sure what that changes, but what I do know is that when the lights come on after last call, it's time to go.
Kicking off the list at number 10, pedestrian crossing. Okay, I see this far too often in the city. People just walking across the street whenever they want. They do a little wave, a little smile, and then they just jaywalk right in the middle of like a highway. Everybody's slamming the brakes, and old Peggy Sue is just crossing wherever is most convenient for her. It's not fair. Well, Article 40 of Beijing's traffic laws stipulates that drivers in motor vehicles can't just suddenly stop, even if it's at a crosswalk. Yeah, so if somebody's about to walk at a crosswalk, they have to wait until drivers go by. It's forbidden to stop at these crossings, and if you do so, you're risking a fine. Hopefully, just a warning. Just a warning not to stop at crosswalks. It's kind of weird. That's an odd slap on the wrist. Hey, I noticed you stopped. Don't. See ya. Number 9, never nude. Okay, how do I word this one here? We've all heard about it in some way, I'm sure. You know those websites that we visit after the sun goes down? Maybe you're scrolling through Reddit even, some random threads pop up, you're like, okay, sure, that's not what I clicked. It happens. I used to download music from the internet. The things I've seen in pop-ups alone, horrifying. I have to wash my eyes. Well, in China, the government monitors the internet, so none of the adult content really makes its way to your eyes ever, even if you wanted it to. You get what I mean? Anything scandalous is censored. Objectionable material as well, just in general, won't make it to the screen or even the book. Yeah, you can't even write about being nude, because they'll toss literature right out. Only think dirty thoughts, don't say them. Number 8. Born this place. The hukou system is an interesting one. When you're raised in a small town, you can't wait to grow up and move. Maybe it's the city life for you that you yearn for. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're sick of hearing trains go by every morning and you want to head to the country and hear some crickets. Having the choice to visit and move back and forth, rent out these places, that's a privilege. Depending on where you were born in China, you may be limited to the areas that you can and can't move to. You might literally be stuck living in the country. The government monitors every single citizen, so if you spend more than 3 days away from your residence, you have to register for a temporary residential permit. They have the system in place so that residents can't just all migrate at the same time to cities and then cause a food shortage. Number 7, family time. Chinese culture centers heavily around respecting your elders. That's a huge element. And really, we need to enforce that everywhere, if I'm being honest. That's a great law. Yeah, I said law. Back in 2013, China introduced an elderly rights law, meaning they're not being neglected anymore. You don't visit Gam Gam, well, you're going to the slammer. Loneliness among the elderly is a major issue, so companies will even allow time off to visit your parents. My heart feels warm knowing this, honestly. My first job was at a retirement home and I used to love it. I used to keep my headphones out, I used to talk to all the old ladies, all the old dudes. I was like 16 years old, I was a garbage guy. I would do recycling. It was the best. I love talking to them. They're lonely. Talk to them. Adults are legally required to also stay in the loop, not just visit, shake a hand or two, and then leave. No, you have to spiritually connect with your elders in China. You can't just phone it in, literally. If you feel bad now, hit that thumbs up and go call your grandma. Number 6, unauthorized reincarnations. Yeah, this one's fun. China's authorities created a law so Buddhist monks can't be reincarnated there without legal permission, of course. Always gotta get legal permission, even to reincarnate. The State Administration for Religious Affairs believes that this was an important step that they had to take. This was put in place to limit the power of the Dalai Lama. So 2 separate Dalai Lamas might be chosen in the future. Yeah, like Captain America, different timelines. This is insane, hear me out. Beijing's view of the current Dalai Lama, the 14th, he's now 86 years old, and he said that when he was 90, he would make the choice whether or not he would be reincarnated, which could end a role that's been in Tibet Buddhism for over 600 years. So yeah, like I said, it's a big deal. That's where laws come in play and make this whole process tricky. The government, they're trying to limit the power of the Dalai Lama since he's been living in exile in India since the late 50s. So we could have Beijing's approved Dalai Lama that was, reincarnated, and the one identified by Buddhist monks. 2 different ones. So if you're planning a reincarnation anytime soon, well, you better get approval from China first. The people of Tibet are very unlikely to accept a Chinese Communist Party appointed Dalai Lama. Number 5, work friends. This next one's a little lighter, and honestly, if this rule was in place over here right now, well, a lot of my friends wouldn't have jobs. You can't date coworkers in China. Yeah, and what's even better than that is that if you date somebody, sometimes your work will assess who you're dating, like outside of the field, and then they have to approve of them. That's amazing. This internet company in China, their dating rule in the workplace got leaked. And let me read some of these rules out, and then let's see if we agree here. Rule 42, males who have been employed for less than a year and females who have been employed for less than 3 months are prohibited from finding a boyfriend or girlfriend in the company. Okay, you gotta bust some tables first. Rule 43, female employees who have found a boyfriend outside the company and have decided to have relations with him must take the initiative to tell their superior. Only if the relationship is fitting for the company can she then continue to be employed, and those who fail to report are directly expelled. So if you worked for Pepsi, Carol from Coca-Cola's accounting would be a no-go. Get what I'm saying? Rule 44, male employees under 25 are restricted from finding a girlfriend in the company. Hashtag grow up. Rule 46, frequently changing boyfriends and girlfriends within the company is prohibited. Those who have changed more than 3 times will be permanently expelled. So choose wisely. Number 4, one-child policy. Immediately darker. This one was phased out recently, but I have to bring it up. Introduced in 1979, the Chinese government made this rule where a majority of couples could only have 1 child. This was done to control population growth, but of course, from a human rights point of view, things got a little dicey. See, come 2015, things didn't magically change, it just switched to a 2-child limit. And then finally, come 2021, it's completely phased out. The government saw this plan as a way to keep things running smooth, but in doing so, they reduced the fertility rate. And there ended up being a labor shortage because seniors needed those kids, as in the only one of those kids, to take care of them. No one was left to work, see what I mean? As per point number 7. Number 3. Tickets, please. Medical systems are different everywhere, and in China, having that many people, things have to run smoothly. It's a must. There's more often than not a wait line for most commodities. They have something called healthcare tickets over there. Honestly, I kind of agree with this. I'm pretty on board. If you're looking to see a doctor, you gotta buy a ticket first. Like a movie, a really slow, boring, coughing a lot movie. You can buy these tickets like you would movie theaters through an app or through a website, whatever works best. Because if you don't have a ticket, it would be an extremely long wait time just to see a doctor and talk and then plan something. After they bought a ticket, patients can register it to a specific doctor that fits their needs, rather than wait in a room full of sick people all going to the same person, that slow process that I'm used to over here in Canada. This way, patients in China can just go specifically to the doctor that they need, rather than get referred over and over and over again and wait in these long lines. Do you agree with this fast pass system? Sound off below. Number 2, busking. Here in Toronto, we have Busker Fest. It's amazing. My friends perform in it. It's loud, it's full of energy. It's an outdoor variety show. If you've been to any major city, at one point you've seen a kid butchering an Ed Sheeran song. That's busking. Buskers are common, and in Hong Kong, they're really not. You're not allowed to whip out a banjo, throw down a hat on the sidewalk, and start improvising with locals. It's an offense to play any musical instrument in the streets. So keep that tromboning to yourself. And finally, number 1, banned. To cap this list off on laws you didn't know about, I figured I'd just rapid fire a few things that are banned in China. All your favorite things. Most of them are websites. Google is a no-go, YouTube as well, so you won't find my face over there. And speaking of face, Facebook too is banned, which honestly isn't really a total loss. Reddit is not allowed, so say goodbye to your late night scrolling. Netflix too is blocked, so no more binging and Netflix and chilling. Wikipedia, blocked. Zoom was blocked for a hot minute. Messenger, of course, being part of Facebook, or I mean Meta, is blocked. So if you wanted to block somebody, you couldn't because Messenger was blocked. I'm saying block a lot. We're all blocked. No more local rappers as well spitting bars on your newsfeed either because SoundCloud has been blocked for 8 years. I'm on board with this one. This one's fine. Until podcasts came out, we're like, okay, drop those. When we're done with scripts here, we toss them in Dropbox. I'll never take Dropbox for granted again because over there it's blocked. Imgur has been blocked for a couple years now too, so no more GIFs. GIFs? GIFs. GIFs. Definitely GIFs.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Little White Lie. The Yurnamu Code is a code or a group of Sumerian laws that were drafted sometime between 2100 and 2050 BC. This is so long ago. Of course things were really different, but there are some laws and rules from that time that really make you go, what? One of these is the bizarre one that pertains to kidnapping. Of course, kidnapping is never good, and they knew that back then, but they were a little more liberal or forgiving when it came to certain scenarios. So basically, according to these rules, kidnapping was punishable but only if both the kidnapper and the kidnappee were free men. If the person who was kidnapped was a slave, the sentence was just a monetary fine. Okay, that's pretty messed up, but it's not necessarily all of that bizarre to hear about the mistreatment of slaves in history. I mean, I said slaves. It was bad from the get-go, and this rule was certainly no exception. But it gets even more bizarre from here. If the person who was taken was a woman, well, I mean, a little white lie and you're good to go. By this I mean, should the kidnapper just claim that the woman had been found in the street alone without a companion, this was enough to get off scot-free because, I mean, how could he possibly know whether or not she belonged to anyone? Yeah, that really was the thought process back then. You see what I mean when I say it's just a law that makes absolutely no sense? Kidnapping is bad. It's so bad we'll put you to death, but like, it's only kinda bad when it's like this. Just kidnap the right way and we'll have no issues. In our number 9 spot today, we have royal fish. This is one law that came into existence because someone was feeling a little greedy. Since 1324, it has been decreed that all beached whales in the UK belong to the king or queen, and we can all thank Edward II for this weird one. In 1324, he passed a law defining whales, sturgeons, dolphins, and porpoises caught within 5 kilometers of the shore as, quote, royal fish. These fish collected a lot of money in medieval markets, and those who were wealthy wanted these fish for their special feasts and banquets. Of course, instead of purchasing them with your riches, what do? Well, you just make up an insane law so that you can steal them, of course. What's even crazier is that this law actually hasn't been repealed, and in 2004 there was a fisherman who caught a 10-foot sturgeon near Wales, and he actually had to ask Queen Elizabeth's permission to sell it. Apparently she told him that he could use the catch as he saw fit. In our number 8 spot today we have the Flamen Dialis. In ancient Roman religion, the Flamen Dialis was the high priest of Jupiter. There are other forms of flamen or high priests, and many of them had bizarre rules surrounding them that they had to follow, but these are some of the strangest. Among the rules set out for the high priest of Jupiter, there were rules that forbade them to touch iron or flour. They were not allowed to ride a horse. Okay, this is weird so far, but not like too bad, right? Well, they also had this rule where if a prisoner enters their home, they must be released. Then their chains must be taken through the hole in the roof and then from the roof dropped into the street. That sounds both weird, oddly specific, and like a lot of work for no reason. The rules don't end there though. The Flamen Dialis also was not to touch or name a female goat. No flame could be carried out of their house unless it was for sacred purpose, and there must be a box of sacrificial cakes at the foot of his bed. This is actually just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the rules these people had to live by. Many of the rest really are just as curious and bizarre. I'll say this, the life of a Flamen Dialis certainly must have been anything but boring. In our number 7 spot today we have Draco's rules. Draco of Thessaly has often been considered the author of the very first laws of Athens, which came around 621 BC, and some of the very first draconian codes were very simple. The jury is out on whether or not they were effective, but it was definitely clear. It goes basically as follows. Did you kill someone? Penalty. Did you steal someone else's goat or whatever animals they had in ancient Athens? Penalty. Did you accidentally forget to pay your taxes? Penalty. You get the idea. You commit a crime? Well, that's it. No second chances on this guy's watch. That's literally it. You're done. Sorry, you should have thought of that before you committed a crime. Also, there's some crazy things that were considered crimes back then, so I can't imagine. Anyway, thankfully his successor wasn't quite so harsh and changed basically all of that, except for the whole death penalty for killing someone thing, which like, fair. At the very least, it's quite a bit more reasonable. In our number 6 spot today we have marital infidelity in Mesopotamia. Hammurabi was an ancient Babylonian king and he ruled Mesopotamia from 1792 until 1750 BC, and during his reign he produced some of the earliest legal codes in history. He created what became known as the Code of Hammurabi, which consisted of 282 laws, which were listed in a sort of if-then kind of format. Each law was distinct to a social class, and the punishments were specific to the type of infraction. There were many bizarre rules here, but one of the strangest parts were the different punishments for men and women, specifically in regard to marital infidelity. So basically, men were allowed to have extramarital affairs with maids, servants, slaves, you know, of course. Women, however, what are you, crazy? Any woman found philandering and their secret lovers were punished by being bound and tossed into the Euphrates. I'm gonna go ahead and say it. Call me crazy, it's just a little bit of a double standard. I don't know, maybe I'm just too futuristic for Mesopotamia. In our number 5 spot today we have a punishment worse than This is more so a punishment for breaking the law rather than the actual law itself, but it's something that I didn't know previously and I found exceptionally interesting. This comes from the Qin dynasty and it involves something worse than the death penalty. You might be wondering how something could be worse than the death penalty, and to that I say, great question, here's how. The penalty could be intensified based on the method that was selected for it. Like sometimes the person who had committed the crime would end up having their entire family executed. That's probably the worst thing I can imagine. Sometimes the criminal, if sentenced to death, would then have their body exposed in the marketplace or their head mounted on a pike, which was meant to disgrace their death. Not only these after-death humiliations, but sometimes pre-death torment also occurred. So yeah, surprisingly, the penalty can actually get worse. In our number 4 spot today we have nope. Okay. This This is a disgusting one. I'm sorry we're talking about it, but it's what the video calls for. This law comes from the ancient Anatolian people who formed an empire between 1600 and 1180 BC. This law is about what happens when a person does something to an animal. I don't want to say it, so we're probably thinking the same thing. It's messed up, you get me. So this law explains that the punishment for this crime depends on what animal it was with. A dog or a pig? No way, buddy. Not on our ancient watch. That's punishable by a horse or a mule? You're a messed up dude, and for that, you never get to appear before the king again. He can't even look at you. A cow? Well, here's the thing. The king is going to decide what happens because this one needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis. See what I mean by this law that makes no sense? I'm glad that they were at least punishing people for this back then. I think we can all agree that that's the right thing to do, but it's just very strange that it differed depending on the animal. You know? In our number 3 spot today, we have Who's to Blame. Okay, we've been having a silly fun time for most of this list, despite the various bizarre laws that have existed, but this one is definitely a little more serious, and it's one that, especially as a woman, is definitely a touch infuriating. This law comes from Nessalem, another one of the laws by the ancient Anatolian peoples. So basically this law starts off a little better than it ends. It has to do with when someone harms a woman. Normally, under this law, this would be punishable by This is where the law goes a bit awry, however. That is the case only when the crime is committed abroad. At home, however, oh, total free-for-all. If this crime happened at home, of course, the woman was actually guilty. Not only that, but she would then be condemned to death instead of the person who did that to her. I actually couldn't believe it when I read it. Things simply were just different back then, and I truly feel grateful that this isn't a law that has stuck around. It does make me feel exceptionally bad for the women who found themselves victim to this insane rule, however. In our number 2 spot today, we have the roast battle. This is perhaps one of my favorite laws, and it's one I think we should bring back. This is officially my petition. This law is hilarious with just a little less harsh of a sentence. You'll see what I mean. This law comes from ancient Rome and the law of the 12 tables, and basically it condemned anyone who sang a joking or mocking song about someone else to but the sentence only came if what the person sang was untrue. If you just roasted the hell out of someone and everyone turned around and said, well, where's the lie? Then there's no problem. Carry on, you little musical genius, you. I mean, at least they were taking a stand against bullying all the way back then. I just think it's insane that the law is so extreme. Like a little silly ditty that's just part of a rumor mill is an absolute no-go. Don't tell the ancient Romans about magazines and tabloids or diss tracks. They'll be so mad. In our number 1 spot today, we have the innocence test. Another one of the rules that comes from the Code of Hammurabi is one that forces accusers to prove their accusations indisputably. Okay, they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. We still go by that, so that's not really that weird. What is weird, however, or maybe dramatic is a better way to put it, is that if they failed to do this, they would then be condemned to biggest Uno reverse card in history. Like, even knowingly false accusations probably shouldn't be punished with the sentence, but imagine just not having enough evidence to convince everyone and then you have to die because of it? Like, it's not like DNA testing or photos or videos existed, so how do you prove these things in a way everyone will believe you? It seems way too risky to even try. Also, one of the methods used to try and test someone's innocence is to throw the accused into the river. If they drowned, it was because the gods knew that they were guilty, but if they managed to get out alive, they were considered innocent, and then their accuser was executed for falsehood. Like, I'm not taking the chance on whether or not this guy can tread water. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have a suit of armor. Okay, so imagine this. You're on your trip to London. You're ready to visit Parliament. It's the moment you've waited for your whole life, and of course you brought your very best suit of armor. You're dressed to the nines. You're fully protected. You're ready. Well, have I got bad news for you? No armor allowed. Yeah, this is a law that made a lot more sense at the time it was created, and the weird part is that it still exists and has never been repealed. By 1313, Edward II had upset so many nobles that he became worried about the prospect of an armed rebellion and wasn't feeling safe enough in Parliament. This led to a statute that claimed that every man shall come to Parliament without all force and armor, and those who didn't abide by this rule would be punished. Since then, no one has thought to change it, and I guess while no weapons still makes a lot of sense, the whole armor thing is simply just because it isn't as popular now as it was then. Who would have thought? In our number 9 spot today, we have magic crops. Many ancient laws are extremely specific, and so much so that they come with a specific punishment to fit the crime. I mean, we have some guidelines around sentencing and stuff, so it's not that weird, right? Well, I mean, it really comes down to what the law is asking, you know? Like, for example, this ancient law comes from the Law of 12 Tables, and it has to do with crops. Basically, the law states that the crime of using magic on crops was punishable by death, this time in the form of crucifixion. Like, please, no one tell the ancient Romans about Monsanto. They'll be so angry. I so badly wish I could know what, at the time, was looked on as magic on crops. Some guy with a green thumb is getting accused of witchcraft. Also, how serious of a punishment? Imagine just making more corn for everyone and suddenly you have to be put to death in one of the worst ways? I don't know, this one seems a little extreme, but almost everything was in ancient times, I'm beginning to think. In our number 8 spot today we have butt naked. This is a law that was first enacted in 1463 and was repealed in 1604, and it has to do with some middle-aged fashion. Basically from 1337 onwards, laws began to be passed that were meant to preserve decency, as well as sort of govern people from dressing above their rank. I mean, God forbid someone wear one too many frills. At this time, however, men's fashion was getting a little out of hand and people were worried about the immoral way it was going. In 1463, a statute was passed that claimed that, quote, no person under the rank of lord was to wear any gown, jacket, or coat which does not cover the genitals and buttocks. Listen, this is a law that absolutely makes sense, it's just absolutely hilarious. I mean, the part that doesn't make sense is that lords or anyone above were just free to roam around with all of their bits and pieces hanging out no problem. It's truly so funny. I wish I could pay money to sit in on the announcement of this law though. Just some sad guy walking home to go put pants on. It's like, but my little butt. In our number 7 spot today we have the right to citizenship. This is a law that was seen in a lot of different societies throughout the ages in some ways or others, and in fact was even seen in our own modern society until about a century ago. Basically, this began in ancient Greece and it has to do with women not being allowed to be citizens. Athenian democracy was only available to adult males and women were left out of it all. Women were referred to as an aste, which meant a woman belonging to the city. In fact, there was a time where, since there was no registration of women, that witnesses would have to testify in court cases to prove that women were the wives of Athenian men. Women had to work at home and were considered second-rate humans, subservient to her male guardian, whether that be her father or husband. This was all justified by the men at the time because it was actually believed that women weren't as intellectually capable as men, and because it was believed that women had a higher sex drive, and consequently, if given free range to engage in society, would be more promiscuous. Basically, they were just insecure and felt that if women had free range, then they would go out and cheat on them, so instead they just really didn't let them participate in society. Of course, it wasn't just a century ago when women got the right to be citizens, but it was just over a century ago that in our modern society we got the right to vote. It's crazy to see how much things have changed and how some other things took quite some time. In our number 6 spot today we have dinner time. This is a law that was first enacted in 1336. It's definitely not the oldest law on this list, but it is one that really shows what things were like at the time. So many of us have heard and learned about the over-the-top extravagance and indulgence that happened at medieval feasts, and this led to, in 1309, a proclamation by Edward II where he began criticizing the outrageous and excessive multitude of meats and other dishes that the nobles were eating. Later, in 1336, there was a statute by Edward III where he too described his unhappiness with the quote, many mischiefs caused by the quote, many sorts of costly meats which people of this realm have used. This statute, however, set out to do something about this overindulgence, and they tackled that by ruling that no man, of whatever rank he be, shall be served a meal with more than 2 courses, except for at certain festivals, such as Christmas, on which 3 courses were allowed. So basically they made a law that banned having more than 2 courses for dinner unless it was a special occasion. I can't imagine the government policing my food consumption. What makes it even funnier is that while these laws are believed to have perhaps influenced behavior, there is no evidence of it actually ever being enforced. So they made the rule to make them feel better basically, and it lasted for quite a while until 1865 when it was repealed. In our number 5 spot today we have family crimes. This is a law that is truthfully kind of similar to one that we talked about in part 1, but this one comes from ancient Egyptian law. It seems as though much of Egyptian law was based on a common sense of right and wrong, following the codes based on the concept of ma'at. Ma'at represented justice, truth, order, and balance, and basically this concept meant that everyone, with the exception of slaves, should be treated as equals under law, regardless of wealth or social position. If we removed slaves from the equation, this is of course not too far off from our current ideals and the current concept we strive to have within our legal system. The huge difference, however, is that when time for punishment came, it wasn't done to just the person who committed the crime. The consequences were for them and their entire family. If a person was exiled, their entire family would be along with them. If a relative faulted on some kind of labor demand or other service, the entire family might be imprisoned. I'm just saying, Uncle Gary and Aunt Lisa really could have messed things up for you big time. Like, I would not trust my extended family with my legal fate. Not a chance. In our number 4 spot today we have fancy footwear. This is another one of those middle-aged laws that has to do with men's fashion, and this time, everyone's butts are away. This one has to do with men's footwear. Shoes with long, pointy ends called krakows or pikes were all the rage back then in the 15th century. Like, I'm talking so much so that the points were getting so long and so out of hand that they were having to be tied around the wearer's ankles or the backs of their knees. It was truly and utterly ridiculous. That same 1463 statute that dealt with everyone's butts, yeah, it also had a part to deal with the shoes, because if everyone is tying up their long shoes behind their knees, how are we supposed to know who the fancy ones are? This law stated that, quote, "No knight under the rank of a lord, esquire, or gentleman, nor any other person shall wear any shoes or boots having spikes or points which exceed the length of 2 inches. Punishments for not following this one was a fine of 3 shillings and 4 pence, which is just over £100 by today's standards. I think this law makes no sense because no one should be allowed to have shoes that long, lord or not. In our number 3 spot today we have revenge. The times of Vikings was certainly an interesting and exciting one, and while many see movies that portray the time and think that Vikings lived in a lawless, almost cavemen-like society, that actually couldn't be further from the truth. While we may not want to take up some of the laws that they lived by, they did have their own codes and laws, and we'll talk about a couple of the weirder ones today. Like this one. Vikings were expected to take revenge as described by the Glotting Code. This was written in the 1000s and is actually the oldest known body of laws in the Nordic countries. So basically, if someone did you some sort of injustice, whether it was violence or insults, you could request financial compensation. I would have been bleeding my childhood bullies dry. However, if you didn't defend yourself, there was a limit to what you could request. You were fully expected to take matters into your own hands if someone wronged you, and if you didn't, this meant that you might be giving up your right to financial compensation. In our number 2 spot today we have the barber. Okay, so this is a law that has to do with slaves. It's an unfortunate part of history, and it's also important to remember that it still does exist in some places. This law, in terms of a society that has slaves, I suppose makes sense. It is just bizarre, however, because the punishment for this is unbelievably extreme. This law is one that comes from the Code of Hammurabi, and during this time, many of the slaves were actually former prisoners of war and their families who were then forcefully inducted into this new Babylonian society. This law basically states that if a barber, without the knowledge of his master, cut the sign of a slave on a slave not to be sold, the hands of the barber will be cut off. How extreme is that? The punishment is so severe, it makes you think that they almost cared about the slaves, but sadly, of course, that wasn't true at all. It was more so looked at as a very serious and important business venture. So serious that they would chop your hands off. In our number 1 spot today we have facing the truth. This is a Viking law that has to do with taking someone else's life, so it's a serious one. Well, I mean, it was kind of serious back then. Basically, you could get away with killing someone, but only if you were honest about it. Like, today we have different charges for different circumstances. More serious and less serious charges, there's like a ranking, but Vikings of course didn't have these exact same distinctions, and instead it was a matter of honesty and being straightforward. For example, something like arson or taking someone's life at night was actually looked down upon because you surprised them, no one else was around, and you didn't give them a chance to defend themselves. I'm like, okay, I see the point they're making, carry on. This is where things go a little awry by today's standards though. You could kill someone in public without serious consequences because you were doing it publicly, and both the person as well as those around them had a chance to react to it. The only other stipulation is that you took responsibility for it and that you didn't flee. Even if a fight broke out and someone ended up passing away but it was unintentional, as long as you were open and honest, it wasn't considered a serious offense. I guess they were just very forgiving in Viking times. Perhaps in the wrong ways, but who am I to say?
Starting us off at number 10, clean cars. For a place with such frequent sandstorms, you would assume they'd understand if you had some dirt on your car. But apparently not. In the United Arab Emirates, or UAE, a dusty car is seen as an act of disfiguring the city image and public health. And therefore, if your car is not kept in pristine, sparkling condition, you risk having it towed and will likely face some pretty hefty impound fees. However, it gets even more complicated because while it is imperative that your car remain clean and dust-free, there are very strict rules surrounding where and how you are permitted to wash said car. Any public area, including residential areas, are illegal. In fact, the only place you can wash the car is, well, the car wash at gas stations. And if you are caught rinsing off the vehicle in anywhere deemed an inappropriate place, you are also fined. So no matter what, there is a possibility of getting into some trouble. Coming in at number 9, public snacking. While it's not prohibited to eat or drink in public in general, except during Ramadan, there is one place that no matter the time of day or year, eating and drinking is strictly banned: public transit. This ban covers not only the buses and other forms of transportation, but the stations and even pedestrian crossings too. Apparently, they just really do not want people to drink their morning coffee on the go. Reportedly, the ban was put in place with good intentions as they were trying to cut back on littering in public spaces, which honestly, fair enough, because people are insane with their litter. However, it's apparently been kind of over-enforced by authorities since it was put in place. Now, luckily with this one, if you are caught, the fine isn't too hefty, only setting you back an equivalent of like $35, but still, it is a very strange rule to have in the first place. Coming in at number 8, flush curfew. Out of all the things on this list, I have to say this is the one that makes me giggle. I just have so many questions about how and why this came to be. Apparently, it is against the law in Dubai to flush your toilet after 10 p.m. And yes, this is real. According to the city's website, apparently the reason behind the regulation was to reduce flooding and water waste, and so that they could ensure that all residents enjoy a peaceful night's sleep. Now, to be fair, this one isn't hurting anybody, so why not? But I do also wonder how this is truly being enforced. Like, how would they know if you flushed your toilet at 10:02? What is the fine? What is the risk you take? Plus, as public restrooms in Dubai are fitted with bidets, it's also illegal to flush toilet paper or anything else down them. So just be warned. Coming in at number 7, living arrangements. In Dubai, one of the laws that is definitely far from North American practices is that it is straight up illegal to live with someone you are not married to. Now, does that mean it never happens? Of course not. Remember, people do things that they are not supposed to do all the time. But still, it is far from allowed. Also, I know that this one seems pretty obvious considering what we know about the UAE, but it's actually a bit more complicated than it sounds. The law surrounding living with someone who you aren't married to doesn't just ban living with someone prior to marriage, but it also means that adults can't live with anyone they aren't married to, meaning two young adults cannot live together as friends even. Apparently, the only way for a single person to find a place to live before marriage that isn't, of course, their parents' house is if the place they are renting from is owned by their parents or siblings. So no matter what, if you're following the law, your parents will be your landlord until you marry. Coming in at number 6, PDA. While there are some obvious forms of PDA that I can totally understand would be restricted, especially in conservative areas like the UAE, believe it or not, pretty much any public display of affection is seen as indecent and a violation of modesty rules, even for married couples. These so-called indecent acts can include kissing, hugging, and even holding hands with your partner. And if caught, infringers can face fines, jail time, and in some really extreme cases, deportation. It's hard to imagine this from our Western lens. I mean, PDA is literally everywhere, it seems, but apparently in Dubai, couples can be apprehended for simply holding hands while walking down the street. So I suppose the moral of the story here is to maybe consider a different destination if you're on your honeymoon. Next up at number 5, snooping. Privacy rights are huge in the UAE, and on one hand, it makes sense. However, there are some circumstances where I'd say it gets a little intense, and that instance is when it comes to people's phones. So in Dubai and the rest of the UAE, it is against the law to peek into anyone's phone without their explicit consent, which, I mean, again, doesn't sound so terrible at first, but just hear me out. This rule extends to any circumstance, so we're not just talking about hacking into someone's phone or computer. You can actually be arrested for just opening up their phone to read a message or sending yourself a photo from their camera roll. Now, of course, the way to get around this is to ask for their permission, which I know seems obvious and would work in most cases to avoid the trouble. But this law is still upheld even if you suspect illegal activity, adultery, or any other number of bad things. So if you're in Dubai, just keep your eyes on your own phone, otherwise you risk paying up to $4,000 to fix the problem. Next up at number 4, poppy seeds. If you happen to enjoy a lemon poppy seed muffin or an everything bagel, I have some bad news for you if you ever travel to Dubai. One of these stranger things that I found out that are illegal in the UAE are poppy seeds. Now, to be fair, the reason behind all of this kind of makes sense if you don't think about it too hard. As most people are aware, poppy seeds are the source of opium, which is understandably a banned substance in the UAE. However, this ban extends to literally just possessing the seed in any form. Anyone found with poppy seeds will face intense punishment, such as jail time, and if you're traveling with them, you risk having your possessions seized by custom officials. I mean, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but it seems like a bit of a leap to ban them entirely. But hey, at least now you know not to try and cross the border with an everything bagel in your hand. Coming in at number 3, fundraising. Countries in North America host fundraisers all the time. Schools get their students to sell chocolate bars, cookie dough, or other treats to send themselves on trips. Nonprofit companies host car washes or round up empty bottles for the depot, and there is literally a giant website dedicated to fundraising for quite literally anything you might want money for. I mean, honestly, in North America, if we can't afford something and we can find a way to not pay for it ourselves, we will. In Dubai, however, private fundraising is strictly forbidden. Anyone caught doing so is not only subject to jail time, but can actually be fined up to the equivalent of $200,000 for it too, and in some cases risk being deported. Now, the good news about this is you'll never feel guilty if you don't buy a chocolate bar from some grade 8 to send them on their band trip. But jokes aside, a world with no fundraiser is so different from the custom here. Now, to be fair, this ban does have an exception, and that is charity. However, any charity must first receive a stamp of approval from the Islamic Affairs and Charity Activities Department, and all funds must be used for humanitarian endeavors. Without their stamp of approval, even if your charity is raising money for good, it is breaking the law. Coming in at number 2, gossip. In Western countries, the concept of the rumor mill is something we literally encounter every every single day. I mean, whether we're talking about tabloids, someone going online and seeing something about a time they encountered a celebrity, or people just trying to stir up the pot. There are literally empires that are built on rumors and gossip. However, if you ever find yourself in Dubai, beware that they have a much different culture surrounding rumors. The belief is essentially that gossip can damage social peace and public order, and essentially it's seen as a threat to national peace. So they quite intensely crack down at even a whisper of a rumor beginning, meaning anything constructed as a rumor is punishable by law, and any form of gossip, especially on social media, can result in up to 3 years behind bars and a fine of 1 million dirhams, or roughly $360,000. And last up in our number 1 spot, swearing. Whether it's online or in a restaurant, swearing is 100% off limits in any public setting within the UAE, including the city of Dubai. Seen as a disgrace to the lifestyle of honor and modesty, anyone caught swearing can be fined up to 10,000 dirhams, which equals a little less than 4,000 Canadian, and is definitely a culture shock for a lot of people. Now, the interesting thing is that some words are viewed as worse than others. The F word, for example, is seen as the ultimate no-no, and saying that could land you in prison for up to a year. And believe it or not, it doesn't stop there. As we know, there is more than one way to communicate, of course, and gestures that exhibit the same essence as a swear word, like flipping the bird for example, are seen as indecent acts that breach pride and modesty and could result in deportation. I mean, I have to wonder how people handle road rage here. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, swearing online is also not allowed. Using swear words in WhatsApp messages or on any kind of social media platform breaches cyber laws. Plus, if you get caught sending emojis or anything deemed an indecent gesture, you could face a fine of up to 250 dirhams, or roughly $90,000, and risk being sent to prison or deported from the country. So if you do visit, for the love of God, don't start quoting a Tarantino movie.
Starting off this countdown, we have the weight. In 2008, a law was introduced which made it mandatory for citizens between the ages of 40 to 74 to have their waists measured regularly. Women can only be 35.4 inches and men can only be 33.5 inches. If you are found bigger than that, then you have to lose weight according to this law. Not only that, but you might even be subjected to fines. I mean, Japan is known for their low obesity rates, and this is one of the factors as to why. In our 9th spot today, we have the ice cream. Now, this is a very bizarre law. Basically, it's illegal to put ice cream in mailboxes. First off, who in their right mind would even think to do something like that? Like, I'm done with this ice cream, where should I put it? The garbage? No, the mailbox. So this law was implemented after a postal service worker put a chocolate ice cream in the mailbox in 2006. Since then, it's been made illegal and offenders are subjected to a hefty fine. You could be imprisoned for up to 5 years or be fined around 4,000 USD. In our 8th spot today, we have your neighbor's mail. Now, I'm sure this has happened to you at least once. But you go home, you check your mail, then you realize that the envelope has your neighbor's name on it. Oops! The mailman delivered your neighbor's mail to your address. So you're like, no problem, I'll just walk to their house and pop it in their mailbox. Boom, wrong, no, arrested. In Japan, it's illegal to hand your neighbors misaddressed mail to them. This is featured in Article 42 of the Postal Law. Basically, they have this in place to protect the privacy of both the sender and recipient. So if any mail that's not yours accidentally gets in your mailbox, you have to send it back to the post office and then they handle it. Which seems like a lot of work when they literally live next door to you, but sorry, that's just how the law is. In our 7th spot today, we have the divorce law. This is another pretty wild law. So if you're a woman and you get divorced by law, you have to wait 6 months before remarrying again. And if you give birth to a child during those 6 months, the child is legally your ex-husband's. As for men, well, they can just remarry instantly. Now, there actually is somewhat a reasonable explanation behind this. Somewhat. So let's say the woman does remarry instantly after divorce, and then she finds out, oh no, I'm pregnant. Well, how would she know who the father is? So the 6-month rule is in place so that it's going to be clear who the kid's father is. In 2016, the law was amended. Now the law is women can remarry immediately after divorce as long as they aren't
pregnant. If they are, then they have to wait 100 days to remarry. And a child born within 300 days of divorce is still legally considered the child of the original husband, even if it's not his. In our sixth spot today, we have the married couple. Now, most married couples do live together, but in Japan, they must. It's illegal for married couples to live separately unless they have a just cause. Now, why is this a law, you may ask? Well, it was passed to prevent divorce rates from spiking. If you're living away from your partner, the separation might take a toll on your relationship. But like I said, most couples do live together after marriage, so it's not that big of a law. We are now at our fifth and halfway mark with indecent exposure. In Japan, it's illegal to expose your thighs or your bum in public. The law was passed in 1948 under the Light Crimes Act. However, this law is rarely enforced, and most women still like to wear miniskirts in public. But if the cops are really out looking for people, then you could be arrested and put in jail for up to 29 days. While we're on the topic of legs, crossing your legs in Japan is considered very casual and improper. In Japan, you are expected to sit tall with both feet on the floor and never cross your ankles over your knee. But don't worry, there's no law surrounding this, so you won't be arrested for accidentally crossing over your legs. It's more so a manner thing, you know, it just can be perceived as rude. In our fourth spot today, we have smoking. Now, most people smoke outdoors and think that's the proper place to smoke. Well, not in Japan. Outdoor smoking is actually banned in Japan. The only place you can smoke outdoors is in designated smoking areas. But smoking is prohibited on the main streets. If you want to smoke, it has to be in these designated areas. They do this to be courteous of the people who don't wish to partake in smoking. What else might surprise you is that many restaurants and bars let you smoke inside. In our third spot today, we have drinking. In Japan, you are allowed to drink in public. It's one of the few countries where it's fine to walk around with a beer in hand. In fact, they even have vending machines that sell alcoholic beverages in public. That being said, if you're hammered walking around the streets and being rowdy, you can be arrested. That's a no-no. Plus, drinking is usually an evening activity, so it's frowned upon if people see you walking around with a drink at like 10 in the morning. Moving on to number 2, we have the walkie-talkies. Okay, so you're planning your trip to Japan. You got your essentials, you got your underwear, your toothbrush, your toothpaste. Did you bring your walkie-talkie? Now I know what you're thinking. Who would want to bring a walkie-talkie with them to Japan? Don't ask me, maybe you have kids that get lost easily and it's too expensive to have an international phone plan. Well, if you're planning to bring walkie-talkies, think again. It is illegal to own walkie-talkies bought from another country. Now, this actually has a really good reason behind it. Japan relies heavily on their radio network to relay important information. Any foreign walkie-talkies can possibly interfere with their signals, so they made them illegal. If you're caught with one, you can face 1 year in prison with fines up to around 9,000 USD. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the dancing. For the longest time, dancing at public venues was illegal. That's right, dancing was illegal. The only place you could dance was at venues with a special dancing license, and you could only dance until midnight. It was illegal as soon as it struck 12. They did this in 1948 as a way to try and get rid of prostitution in these dance halls. Just recently, they changed the laws so you can dance after midnight, but the venue has to keep their lights on. So as soon as it's midnight in Japan, the lights turn on if you want to keep dancing. If venues don't follow this law, they could get in serious trouble. Alright guys, that's all for today's video. Let me know in the comments below where you are from. Do I have any viewers from Japan here? If so, let me know about these laws. I'm actually fascinated. Starting off this countdown, we have the pests. One very important thing to know about Antarctica is that its ecosystem is pretty fragile. This is due to climate change, loss of biodiversity, human impacts, and the accidental introduction of non-native or alien species. Somehow, we as humans have introduced 121 types of fungi, 72 invertebrates, 8 mammals, and 3 bird species. Now, there are even worms in Antarctica. This is why Antarctica has a don't pack a pest rule. This means that before coming to Antarctica, everything you bring must be thoroughly washed, decontaminated, and inspected. This is to make sure you don't got any tiny seeds on ya. They'll even hoover you just to make sure. It's pretty intense, but it's done in order to protect Antarctica. Moving on to number 9, we have no souvenirs.
So you took a trip to Antarctica and you want to take something as a memento to remember your trip by. Too bad, you're not allowed to. Taking anything home from Antarctica is banned. That includes a small pebble from a beach or a small bird feather. You can't take any kind of biological material home. Now the reasoning behind this is that there are around 10,000 scientists operating there. They don't want you accidentally taking a fossil home with you or something. You also can't take any equipment you find randomly, even if it's unattended, because chances are it's research equipment and that would be stealing. There's no finders keepers rule in Antarctica, sorry. Moving on to number 8, we have the lichen. Believe it or not, but plants do grow in Antarctica. When people think of this continent, they think of it as a cold, barren place, which is fair, but several types of grass, moss, and lichen grow there. One rule that Antarctica has is that you are prohibited from walking on the lichen. Now, it's because that it takes such a long time to grow, and if it gets damaged, it'll take an even longer time to repair itself. And it may not look like much, but it's vital to Antarctica's ecosystem. In our 7th spot, we have the rescue. Now Antarctica is pretty freaking big. It's twice the size of Australia, and it has the lowest recorded temperature on Earth. Not only that, but there's not a lot of people living there, which is why, if you're in danger, don't expect to be rescued. It sounds depressing, but it's just realistic. And with Antarctica's unpredictable weather conditions, rescues are basically impossible. Tour groups literally will tell you not to stray away. If anything happens to you, you're kind of SOL. This place might be beautiful, but it's harsh and full of unseen dangers. In our 6th spot, we have the no guns law. Antarctica is a demilitarized zone, meaning absolutely no military activity can take place there. This means that there cannot be any military bases or structures of any kind, and absolutely no weapons testing. With that comes the no weapons law. No firearms or explosive devices are allowed there unless you have been given direct permission. Now, officials in Antarctica do have a firearm, but it's locked away in a glass cabinet in the station master's office. It's a 12-gauge shotgun, and it's only used in emergency situations. According to a local, the only time the station master used this gun was when a man was chasing another man around town with a butcher knife, shouting something about aliens. The next day, the station master was seen escorting this man, who was placed in a straitjacket, onto a plane to get him out of there. He had his gun with him as protection. Other than him, you're not allowed to have any firearms in your possession. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the dolphins. Dolphins are cute, right? Maybe you want to go out whale and dolphin watching and you just want to get close to them. Well, don't. There is a rule in Antarctica that states you must leave the dolphins alone. This includes sailing a boat directly into a group of dolphins to try and get them to bow ride with you. Now, they have been known to do this on their own, but it's forbidden to harass these mammals in an attempt to get them to do it. Not only that, but Antarctica is home to hourglass dolphins. These types of dolphins are very rare and not yet threatened, so they want to keep it that way. In our 4th spot today, we have the wisdom teeth removal. Turns out that you gotta get your wisdom teeth removed before going to Antarctica. This is mainly important for people wanting to stay there for a while or those that are going to work there. If you're doing a quick visit, then you don't really gotta worry about this. Now, having your wisdom teeth removed lessens the risk of having a medical emergency since medical aid is very limited there. But not everyone needs to have them removed. You have to undergo rigorous medical and dental exams before going to Antarctica. So if it's found that your wisdom teeth won't be a problem, then you don't have to have them removed. In our 3rd spot, we have the nuclear weapons. Antarctica is a nuclear-free zone. You know, just in case you were thinking about bringing a nuclear bomb or something with you, you can't, I'm sorry. On top of that, it cannot be used for testing nuclear weapons. A treaty was made when test explosions were being carried out in the South Pacific. They were scared that Antarctica, being largely deserted, was going to be an area where people also wanted to conduct nuclear testing. But this treaty prohibits them from doing so. You're also not allowed to use Antarctica for the disposal of nuclear waste. Moving on to number 2, we have the appendix removal. If you're going to Antarctica for an extended period of time to visit, live, or work there, there's just one tiny little thing you have to cough up. Your appendix. Yeah, you heard me. Anyone there for a long time has to get their appendix removed. Now this is because the nearest major hospital is 1,000 kilometers away, or 625 miles, and there are only a few doctors on base and none are specialist surgeons. So if something goes wrong with your appendix, they won't be able to help you. Now there are also doctors available in the research bases. Again, none of them are surgeons who can operate on appendixes. Also, let's say something severe does happen. Medical evacuations take a lot of time and effort and end up putting everyone else at risk. So they make people get their appendix removed as a preventative measure. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the jurisdiction. Now the jurisdiction of Antarctica is confusing, and that's because Antarctica doesn't belong to anyone. There's no single country that owns Antarctica. So when you visit, you're under the jurisdiction of your own country. Same with the researchers working there, regardless of which national station they may visit. So when there, you are subjected to the laws of your country. If you break any of the rules of the Antarctic Treaty, you face the laws on that when you return home. Same thing goes if you commit a crime there, you face punishment when you return home. Starting off this countdown, we have death. Now this might seem very weird, but for the longest time, it was illegal to die. Yes, you heard me. This law is said to date back to the Greek island of Delos in the 5th century BC. The island was considered a very holy place to the ancient Greeks, so they decided they needed to purify it. By 6th century BC, all dead bodies buried in sight of the island's main temples were actually dug up and removed. They didn't want any dead bodies near this holy place. Turns out that wasn't enough for them though, and they ended up declaring that all dead bodies on the island must go. Then they got even more carried away and just said that the act of death itself was illegal. Which is wild to me. Like, what if you accidentally die? Like, how are they gonna arrest you anyways? Like, you're dead at that point, doesn't even matter. But the ancient Greeks were not the only ones with this law. In 2005, the mayor of a Brazilian town introduced a law that made death legal. He implemented this law as an attempt to solve the city's problem with lack of burial spaces. And 3 towns in France also have this law. They have made death illegal since 2000, and that's because they were going to build more cemeteries, but their plan got rejected. So instead, they're like, okay, well, if we can't have more space to bury the dead, then just dying is illegal. You can't die. Coming in at number 9, we have the pet hair. Now, America has some pretty strange laws. If you want to see a video on all the weirdest laws in America, make sure to smash that like button and let me know in the comments below so that I know. Now, in Delaware, you are banned from selling your cat or dog's hair. First off, who is out here buying cat and dog hair? Second, if this is a thing, then dog groomers would be rich. So apparently some people like to wear dog or cat fur, kind of like how people wear rabbit fur jackets. And so I guess there was this whole hair selling ring that they needed to crack down on. According to the law, and I quote, in Delaware, a person is guilty of the unlawful trade in dog or cat byproducts in the 2nd degree if the person knowingly or recklessly sells, barters, or offers for sale or barter the fur or hair of a domestic dog or cat, or any product made in whole or in part from the fur or hair of a domestic dog or cat. So don't do it, folks. Your pet poodle might shed a lot, but don't even think about scraping your couch or leggings to get as much hair as possible to sell. In our 8th spot today, we have the sharing of Netflix. Who here actually owns a Netflix account? Versus who here knows someone with a Netflix account that you are using for free? Let me know in the comments below. Now, I asked this because in Tennessee, it is illegal to share your Netflix password. That is right. That is an actual law that was passed in 2011. Now apparently this law is mainly directed at hackers who would sell login credentials and passwords to people. But it also applies to the people who let their friends mooch off of their account for free. But if you live in the same household as the person, then it's fine. You're allowed to share accounts. But if you don't, right to jail. In our 7th spot, we have the wild swans. Now I did not know this, but in the UK, every wild swan technically belongs to the crown. This has been a law since the 12th century. I mean, I don't know why you would want to put a claim on swans, but okay. Apparently, back in the day, swans were a delicacy, and they loved eating them at banquets and feasts, so they put a claim on all swans. But don't worry, allegedly they are no longer eaten. Allegedly. Now, since the swans belong to the crown, this means that anyone who injures or kills a swan can be prosecuted, and if you steal a swan, it's considered theft. In our 6th spot, we have marry a dead person. The fact that this is a law in the first place, it concerns me. Now, there was a time way back in the day in France where people could marry a corpse, but only if the family members consented to it. For example, if your partner died in battle before you could get married, or if you were pregnant with their child, then you could easily get married to their dead corpse. And by doing so, it would make your child legitimate. But people couldn't just be like, ooh, Nancy's dead, I had a crush on her forever, now I can finally marry her. No, that's not how it worked. In fact, in 1959, there was a spike of people getting married to their dead partners. On December 2nd, 1959, the Malpasse Dam in France burst. As a result, 423 people lost their lives. After that event, tons of people were getting married to their deceased partners. And as recently as 2017, someone married their partner posthumously. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the smiling. In Milan, ever since the 19th century, there has been a law where it is a legal requirement to smile at all times. Even if you're having a bad day, you better be smiling. The only exception being during funerals or hospital visits. Now, I don't know about you, but my cheeks would kill me if I had to smile all day every day. Now, it is very unlikely for you to get in trouble if you're caught not smiling, but they have handed out fines for it before. Now, you may be asking me, Lindsay, why is this a law in the first place? To make Milan a happier place? No! This law dates back to when Italy was under Austrian rule. They used this law as a way to force people to accept foreign governance. They thought the people that weren't smiling were the ones against this, so they were easy to spot. But obviously this rule hasn't been enforced in years. In our 4th spot, we have getting drunk in a pub. I mean, it makes sense that if you go to a pub, maybe you'll have one too many drinks and you get a little drunk. Well, don't even think about doing this in the UK. A UK statute actually prohibits people from getting drunk in a pub, the place where you go to drink. This law applies to pretty much any establishment in England and Wales that isn't private property. It just seems so silly though. You would think a pub is the one place you could get drunk. Now, this is an offense under the Criminal Justice Act of 1968. This law states that under Section 12 of the 1872 Licensing Act stipulates that every person found drunk on any licensed premises shall be liable to a penalty, which currently stands at £200. Moving on to number 3, we have the runny nose. Now, this is another weird law from the UK, this time from Newmarket in Suffolk. Basically, this is the birthplace of horse racing. It was extremely popular in around 1606, and it became a huge business. So big, in fact, that they passed a number of laws to help protect their horses. One of them being making it illegal to blow your nose in the street. They were scared that the racing horses would get sick and not be able to compete, and it would damage their business. So yeah, anyone who was caught blowing their nose back then would be fined. Even if you were caught walking around while sick, you were fined. Don't worry, these laws aren't a thing anymore. In our 2nd spot today, we have the criminal animals. Did you know that back in the day, animals could be tried in court for criminal offenses? I literally can't imagine that, like a chicken taking a stand in court because it stole its neighbor's feed. But alas, it was a real law. In the Middle Ages, people tried animals in court. I kid you not, mice and insects got trials for destroying grain or damaging churches. Whereas larger animals like pigs and horses got trials for injury or murder. If they were found guilty, which they usually were, they can't really defend themselves, they would receive the death sentence. But it's not like they know what murder is or what they're doing. I mean, one time a pig in France killed a youngling and it got hanged for murder. Isn't that wild? Just thank gosh these laws aren't around anymore. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the pregnant women. Have you ever wanted to get away with murder? And I hope your answer is no, Lindsay, I'm not insane. But if you answered yes, Well, it turns out it's pretty easy if you live in New Hampshire. All you gotta do is be a woman and be pregnant. In 2017, New Hampshire passed an anti-homicide law. New Hampshire Senate Bill 66 was all about fetal homicide, saying that a fetus is a person by 20 weeks. So if you accidentally killed this fetus, let's say in a car crash, then you would be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But the law didn't apply to pregnant women who might need an abortion. But somewhere along the line while passing this bill, the words got jumbled and it made it seem like it was legal for pregnant women to murder anyone that they want. So for a brief period of time, they could have killed someone and got away with it. Thankfully, they realized their mistake before this happened.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have no beard. Peter the Great was the Tsar of Russia, and during his time in this position, it is said that he really admired some of the cultures of Western Europe. Because of this admiration, he introduced a lot of Western styles of dress to his court, Western art, Western architecture. You get it, the whole shebang. On one of his visits to the West, it is said that Peter realized that there weren't many beards in the West. They weren't really as popular, and he didn't see as many people sporting them. This of course was quite the contrast to what he was used to. I mean, at the time in Russia, it is said that beards were quite popular in all types of people, and it is said that this was because at the time a beard was seen as bringing a man closer to God, so of course people wanted to sport them. Peter saw this difference and decided it was time to put an end to free beards. What I mean is that he introduced a beard tax that pretty effectively made having a beard illegal for most people. Those who could afford this tax were given tokens that showed they were allowed to keep the beards, and those who had a beard without a token would be held down and had their beard shaved in public, which just might be one of the weirdest things I've ever said. In our number 9 spot today we have pies. Okay, so apparently there's a rumor that England once banned the eating of mince pies, and while it's not the full truth, that did actually kind of happen. So basically, eating mince pie has been illegal in England only at one point in time. The reason behind this is because at this time, everything Christmas related was being banned because Christmas Day fell on a day of fasting. During this time, Oliver Cromwell had come to power after the execution of King Charles I, and his government was trying to at least downplay, if not ban, everything to do with Christmas, and this included eating mince pies. So during all of this, it wasn't completely illegal to eat a mince pie, but it definitely wasn't promoted. The closest they came to outlawing mince pies would have been in 1656, but thanks to the restoring of Charles II to the throne, mince pies are now free to be eaten wherever one should choose. Now I want a pie. In our number 8 spot today we have no football. Football, or soccer if you're Canadian like me, is truly an ancient game, but despite the fact that people have been playing it for centuries and centuries, it has had a bit of a rocky history and has actually been banned on several occasions in England, as well as in Scotland and France. It is said that the first official ban of the sport was in 1314 when King Edward III decided to ban it within the London city walls because he had received complaints from merchants that the sport was causing disturbances in their business. Other monarchs would also go on to ban the sport, mostly on the grounds that it interfered with archery practice. In 1424, the sport was banned by King James I in Scotland, and the punishment was a fine of 4 pence. All in all, it's safe to say that football has had a bumpy ride to get to be the beloved sport that it is today. In our number 7 spot today we have sloth. This is a law that was seen and followed by the Inca. It is well known that the Incas had quite a wonderful and advanced civilization, and that is certainly no easy feat, especially for the time period. This is exactly why, while this rule might be a little extreme in our modern times, it definitely makes more sense for the time period and where it comes from. This rule was about laziness and how it was really looked down upon. Lazy people would deprive the Sapa Inca of their work, and the punishment for this was hefty. Laziness was punishable by death. So don't eat that extra bag of chips on the couch. In our number 6 spot today we have no insults. Okay, so this is a law that comes from the time of Vikings, and it of course has to do with insults. I mean, they definitely took them quite seriously. So basically, if you hurled insults at someone, they were entitled to compensation, and they could summon everyone else who's on the road to be the witness. If you spoke bad of someone during the Viking Age, even if the person wasn't there, it could ruin their reputation, and because of that, you need to pay them for the possible damages. It doesn't even matter if the insult was true, either. Your reputation was how you gained employment, met friends. It was a really important thing that was not to be messed with. Also, if you insulted one man, you insulted his entire family as well. So that's like 20 people right there, one insult. There were some words, however, where a man would be allowed to kill you if you said them about him. So maybe choose carefully and think before you speak, if you're still a Viking. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Holmgang. This is another Viking Age law that has to do with single combat. Basically, these fights called Holmgang were the easiest way to ascend the social ladder and get rich. So basically, if someone didn't show up for their fight, the other guys got to call him the worst of the worst insults 3 times over, because, I mean, we know how terrible and detrimental that would be. But if they both show up, the match is on. If you weren't capable of fighting, you could have someone else fight on your behalf, like it's Game of Thrones and it's a trial by combat. I'm looking at you, the Mountain. The duel didn't necessarily have to end in death, although it could and usually did, but drawing blood was enough. Someone just had to surrender, but then who knows what people would say about you after. In our number 4 spot today, we have sandcastles. This is a law that is said to have existed in the city of Eraclea, Italy. Basically, the law states that the building of sandcastles is illegal. Honestly, I didn't know that sandcastles were a government concern, but here we are. It is said that the rationale behind this law is that banning sandcastles helps keep the public decorum or the public decency. To me, it just seems like they made a law for the sake of making laws, but I'm just wondering what the punishment for it would have been. In our number 3 spot today, we have no sway. The Theodosian Code is one that was written in 438 AD, and one of these rules was a strict no solicitation policy. What I mean by that is that it forced all Christian churches to submit to the Catholic Church, and if they refused to submit, the penalty would be being considered a heretic. If someone tried to convert someone away from Catholicism, well, real trouble would ensue. It's kind of ironic when you really think about it, but this law suggested that anyone who tried to sway someone away from the Catholic Church would receive a penalty of death. Honestly, I'm starting to wonder if you could do anything in ancient history that didn't end up with a death sentence. Don't get me started on sandcastles. In our number 2 spot today, we have the veil. So this law is one that comes from the Asura Code, which is a compilation of Assyrian laws that were written about 1075 BC. This law was in reference to women and how a woman that was considered honorable should cover their faces in public with a veil. This meant that women who weren't considered honorable definitely were not allowed to wear veils, because how else could you tell the difference? You would think that they would focus on anything else, but apparently this was a very serious crime. If a woman who wasn't supposed to wear a veil was found wearing one, she would receive a swift and harsh punishment that would see her having her clothing removed, receiving 50 lashes, and then she would see herself condemned to death. Yeah. It was a little overdramatic. In our number 1 spot today, we have no dying allowed. This is a law that seems to me like it might have been kind of hard to enforce, but that didn't stop people from trying. There apparently has been several places that made dying illegal throughout the centuries. It is said that the earliest known case of this law was seen on the Greek island of Delos in the 5th century BC. The island was considered to be a holy place by the ancient Greeks. This meant that the entire island needed to be purified in order to make it a proper place to worship the gods. In the 6th century BC, all the bodies and graves that were in sight of the main temple on the island were dug up and removed. That's how seriously they took it. To further this, the Delphic oracle decreed that all bodies must go and that the act of death was illegal on the island, as was giving birth.
Number 10. Approved haircuts. If you're a fan of going to the barber and being able to style your hair however you like, then you won't like this rule. In North Korea, both men and women are required to have one of only 28 government-approved haircuts. There are 18 different styles for women and only 10 for men. Younger men are also required to have hair no longer than 5 centimeters, while older men can get away with up to 7. Women are also typically expected to have a shorter style if they are married and a longer style if they're not. The list notably does not include leader Kim Jong-un's current hairstyle, and that is because no one else is allowed to share the same hair and look as their leader. All the styles appear incredibly neat and straightforward, likely due to North Korea's importance on their image and presenting themselves as a well put together and normally functioning country. Not a single hair out of place. Number 9. Elections. As we all know, North Korea runs under a type of dictatorship, with Kim Jong-un having total control over the country. The citizens are not allowed to choose who they have governing over them. So then, why do they have elections? That's right, like most other countries across the globe, people of legal age show up to a voting center and cast their vote on who they think is the best fit. While in countries like the United States and Canada, people have a choice on whether or not they actually want to exercise their right to vote. In North Korea, however, every single person over the age of 17 is required to show up on election day. Everyone is expected to turn up early, meaning there are usually lines longer than your DMV, and when you get inside, you're given a ballot, with only one name on it. You do not tick a box or fill anything out, you simply take the ballot and hand it in. While you theoretically could cross out the name, this would result in the secret police coming after you. Everyone then gathers outside and has a celebration, putting on a show of happiness and loyalty for being able to elect their leader. Number 8. Names. When you were born, it's most likely that your parents gave you a name. They had the freedom to give you just about any name they could come up with, and as a result, there are some people out there who didn't particularly like the name that they were given. But don't worry, as we know that we have the freedom to get our name legally changed, if that's what we wanted. However, citizens in North Korea have a little bit less choice when it comes to their title, as with many other things in their lives. Throughout the ruling of the Kim family, it has always been illegal to have the same name as the current leader, and the same remained true when Kim Jong-un took over for his father. An uncovered document said the following: all party organs and public security authorities should make a list of residents named Kim Jong-un and train them to voluntarily change their names. Authorities should make sure that there is no one making unnecessary complaints or spreading gossip regarding this project. As in North Korea, citizens are expected to never speak out against what is going on in the country, or else they and their families will face harsh punishment. Number 7. Gaming. I decided to sprinkle in a few South Korean laws in this list, as most of us are already aware of the backwards and harsh ways in the North. Those of us who like to stay up into the late hours of the night and play games like Fortnite or Minecraft would probably be devastated if we had to live by what is known as the Shutdown Law or the Cinderella Law. In South Korea, the Youth Protection Revision Act forbade children under the age of 16 from playing online video games between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m. However, kids can get around this by instead just playing console or mobile games. But we all know that late night gaming on comms with your friends is where the true fun is to be found. Many children and their parents complained about this law, saying that it went against their rights and freedoms, but the Constitutional Court of Korea rejected the complaints. However, as of August 2021, the rule has been abolished and the children of South Korea are free to game again. Number 6. Students. If you already hated going to school as a kid, then I promise you, you would hate going to school in North Korea 10 times more. And not just because of the harsh rules and disciplines present within the country. While your parents probably hated going back to school shopping and having to spend all their money on your pencils, erasers, and binders, they actually had it pretty easy. Students that are attending school in North Korea are required to pay for and provide their own desks and chairs, and even have to pay money towards the heating of the school buildings. So while you probably had a desk that wobbled and an overly squeaky chair a few times, hey, at least you didn't have to pay for it. If you're a standout student though, you could be able to attend a special purpose school within the country, these being for children who appear to be exceptionally talented in things like academics, music, and sports, as they want to raise the best children to represent their country and boost their image. Number 5. Tattooing. Let's head back down south of the border again and take a look at another weird law from South Korea, this one being in regards to having tattoos. When you're walking downtown in your hometown or any other city, you may notice that there are plenty of neon signs advertising places where you can receive tattoos. And while some of them may look a little sketchy, most tattoo artists are pretty well trained and know exactly what they're doing. In South Korea, however, they require a lot more training. In fact, you can only get a tattoo from a licensed medical professional, as the process is seen as a medical procedure. This makes South Korea the only developed country to have this law. Despite the legal implications, there are still around 50,000 operating tattoo artists who are risking fines of millions of dollars and multiple-year prison sentences in order to put art on people's bodies. And while there are strict rules in regards to tattooing, it's not illegal to have a tattoo. It's more just seen as taboo, and you may not be allowed to enter certain spaces if you have visible tattoos on your body. So I guess if I ever go to South Korea, I'll just need to pack a lot of long sleeve shirts. Number 4, religion. When we look at a history of the communities that are often referred to as cult-like or other strict affiliations, we often see that they are typically based on heavy enforcement of religion, like the FLDS or even Jonestown. So it might confuse some outsiders to learn that practicing religion in North Korea is completely banned. While the Constitution says that the citizens have the freedom to practice religion, we know that freedom isn't really a word that exists in that country, and people are prevented from practicing to their choosing. The country being considered an atheist state. People are expected to completely devote themselves to their leader Kim Jong-un, so there's really no room for religious practice there. While religion is banned, many people in the country apparently do believe in spirits and ghosts and shamanism, or human communication with the spirit world, and it's a very common practice among the people, reportedly most often popping up in the form of fortune telling. Defectors often communicating with and reaching out to spirits for advice on when they should attempt to bring the rest of their family across the border. Number 3, Sunday. As can be assumed, North Korea has a heavy emphasis on labor and constantly working. Adults and children alike are often forced into labor and putting in long hours for really no returns. It was even reported that orphan children were volunteering to work in mines and on farms. Knowing this, it will probably come as no surprise that even the weekends aren't a time for rest. While you might spend your Sunday afternoon sleeping in and playing video games, North Koreans spend their Sundays on a mandatory Labor Day. They often do cleaning around the house and are required to do all the work by hand. And speaking of labor, expecting mothers are also required to go into labor and birth their child completely alone, and cannot meet their husband or family until a week after the birth. Just a little side topic there. Number 2, defamation. Another South Korean law on the list. Let's take a look at their laws surrounding defamation. I figured this one was particularly topical due to the recent trial that I'm sure we're all aware took place. In countries like the United States and Canada, it's incredibly hard to actually prove a defamation case and be able to win it. But in South Korea, it's actually the opposite, and they have very strict laws surrounding it. In most cases, defamation comes from false allegations that negatively impacted the person that they were about. In most cases in South Korea, however, you can be found guilty of defamation even if what you said was 100% completely true and proven. Many people see this as their way of silencing critics and protecting powerful businesses and people, but the people who do support it say that they are simply protecting their right to privacy and not having their personal information shared. Number 1, disrespect. As the government forces the citizens of North Korea to see Kim Jong-un as their divine and just leader, no disrespect against his name, image, or really anything about him at all is allowed, and doing so can result in a very severe punishment to both you and your family. Citizens of North Korea are required to have a portrait of their present and past leaders hanging up in their home, and they will even send around inspectors to make sure. One woman was faced with a terrifying situation when her home caught fire. She ran back into the flames and smoke in order to save her 2 young children. So she's a hero, right? Well, not in the eyes of the North Korean government. She is actually facing jail time because in saving her children, she allowed the portraits of the leaders in the home to burn in the fire. In the case of an emergency like a flood or a fire, you are expected to prioritize the portraits and will only be considered a hero if you manage to save them from destruction. Another situation happened where a political member of the country was severely punished for falling asleep in a meeting with Kim Jong-un.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have no gum. You know when some people choose to do something wrong and then it ruins things for everyone who wasn't doing the wrong thing? Yeah, well that's exactly what happened in Singapore, and now no one can chew gum. There were some people who decided to try and mess with the mass rapid transit system, and they used chewing gum to do it. These people ended up costing the Housing and Development Board $150,000 a year just to clean up this gum, so in 1992 they banned it. They banned all gum substances taxes, and so anyone importing, selling, or making gum can potentially face fines or even jail time. In 2004, however, there was an exemption made for those who needed gum for therapeutic, dental, or nicotine chewing gum reasons, and those can be bought from a doctor or a pharmacist. In our number 9 spot today, we have strange cows. This law is one that was repealed in 1974 because at one point, I'm sure this made a lot of sense, but surely by 1974 and especially by now, it is just hilarious. This law is from Texas, and it stated that whoever, without the consent of the owner, shall take up, use, or milk any cow not his own, faced a $10 fine. How weirdly specific. There was a law and a specific amount of a fine set up just for milking a stranger's cow. I mean, I feel like I understand why this one is illegal, because how strange is it to milk someone else's cow? A little intrusive if you ask me, to be honest. Of course, the only reason you'd be milking someone else's cow would be to steal the milk, and that is rude to do now, but back in the day that could have had much heavier implications. Although that specific law was repealed, there is still a law in Texas that is in regards to the same sort of thing. It is still illegal to milk someone's cow without permission, but now you'll be charged with theft and trespassing instead of that flat $10 rate. Also, who wants to be the weirdo stealing milk straight from a cow? That's just strange. I don't know how you'd explain that, really. In our number 8 spot today, we have Hold It. Remind Taylor and I that we can never take a trip to Switzerland if this law really does exist. Not because it's not a stunningly beautiful place and I'm sure filled with wonderful people, but because I'm not sure we could take this trip without breaking this law. Basically, if you're one of those people like Taylor who wakes up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, make sure you don't flush if you're in Switzerland and it's after 10 p.m. because this is actually considered to be contributing to noise pollution. That flushing sound might just mean that you are breaking the law. I mean, it seems a little extreme, but as someone who really values peace and quiet, I do kind of understand this one a little bit. That or toilets in Switzerland are just extremely loud and I am blissfully unaware. Can any Swiss people confirm this one? What do you do in this case? I just have a lot of questions. In our number 7 spot today, we have no fun. Since 1966 in Victoria, Australia, it has been illegal to fly a kite in a public space if it bothers someone else. You actually can't even play a game in a public space if it's gonna annoy someone else. Really hope you don't have a Karen in the neighborhood, I guess, or no jump rope for you. This was listed as a part of the Summary Offences Act, but it's crazy that this is something that came into effect as recently as 1966 and not hundreds of years ago. It just seems like such a random rule to instate. And it was way more popular to see these kinds of quote no fun laws in legislation from centuries ago. Or footloose, I guess. Anyways, all of this aside, I don't think that there are many Aussies who will be upset if you choose to fly a kite on a nice breezy day. In our number 6 spot today, we have selfie etiquette. This is one law that actually makes quite a bit of sense to me. This law comes from Sri Lanka, and it basically has to do with the etiquette that should be seen when someone is around a statue of Buddha. Of course, many people, whether local or tourists, will stop at a Buddha statue to admire it, to pay respects, to pray, and in this day and age, of course, a lot of times this comes with a selfie. Here's the thing though, regular selfie pose is a no-no for this one, and that is because turning your back to Buddha is a huge offense. You could be forced to delete the photos. I mean, who would even want the evidence of you committing this crime anyway? And if you were to refuse deleting them, things might go as far as to have the police called. There are definitely other ways, positions, and poses where you can snap a pic with the statue, but just never with your back to it. In our number 5 spot today, we have tree climbers. I feel like I should have known of this law before, especially considering the fact that it comes from just outside of Toronto in Oshawa, Ontario, but despite that, this one is news to me. Don't get too excited on your next park day in Oshawa and end up climbing a tree, because that is apparently strictly forbidden. One of the bylaws for the city says, quote, no person shall interfere with a tree or part of a tree located on municipal property, including, but not limited to, attaching, affixing, or placing upon in any matter any object or thing to a tree or part of a tree and climbing the tree. That was a long way to say that. Yeah, the law states that there is just simply no tree climbing allowed. This does again seem like a kind of footloose rule, but it is said to have been made with only safety in mind. The Canadian law discussion talked about how this law came to be and said that it was put in place to stop citizens from trying to act like Spider-Man. The city of Oshawa is just out here trying to care for the citizens and their safety. In our number 4 spot today, we have royal fish. This is one law that came into existence because someone was feeling a little greedy. Since 1324, it has been decreed that all beached whales in the UK belong to the king or queen, and we can all thank Edward II for this one. In 1324, he passed a law defining whales, sturgeons, dolphins, and porpoises caught within 5 kilometers of the shore as, quote, royal fish. These fish collected a lot of of money in medieval markets, and those who were wealthy wanted these fish for their special feasts and their banquets. So of course, instead of purchasing them with your riches, what else would you do? Well, you just make up a law so that you can steal them, of course. What's even crazier is that this law actually hasn't been repealed, and in 2014 there was a fisherman who caught a 10-foot sturgeon near Wales, and he actually had to ask Queen Elizabeth's permission to sell it. Apparently, she told him that he could use the catch, quote, as he saw fit. In our number 3 spot today, we have the light bulb moment. Another Victoria, Australia law. Apparently, it is illegal to change a light bulb. At first, I thought it was a little insane, but basically, you just need a valid license to do so, which means only certified electricians are allowed to change them. It is a little extreme and probably really inconvenient, but I think that playing this one on the safe side can't be ridiculed too much. Electricity could be a pretty terrifying thing, especially when you don't really know what you're doing. For sure, not the most difficult task an electrician faces, but hey, it's gotta be done. I just have to ask though, what happens if your light goes out on like a Saturday or a Sunday? Do you have to pay premium light bulb changing prices? How much does the light bulb change cost in the first place? Who supplies the light bulbs? I don't know, I've just got a lot of questions. In our number 2 spot today, we have walking time. Dogs everywhere, rejoice, this one is for you. If you live in Turin, Italy and have a dog, you better be prepared to get your steps in, because taking your dog for any less than 3 walks a day is considered a crime. This one makes a lot of sense considering how many neglectful dog owners are out there, and I am totally on board with holding these people accountable. Not getting outside for 3 walks a day could land you a fine of 500 euros. Italy is known as an animal-loving nation, and they actually have a few other laws in place to protect animals, including strays. If you're planning on or already live in Italy, this law is definitely something to consider before getting a beloved furry friend. Honestly, even outside of Italy, this is something that every dog owner should get in the habit of practicing, under the threat of fine or not. In our number 1 spot today, we have birthday rules. This is a law that I can surely get behind. In Samoa, it is illegal to forget your wife's birthday. I've always agreed that this should in fact be a crime. Should you happen to be forgetful and end up missing this day, you are required to compensate your wife for doing so, and if your wife was feeling extra spiteful and decided to perhaps complain to the police, you might even have to answer to the law. Definitely one of the more extreme and surprising laws on this list, but I'm sure the wives are happy. I guess here it's definitely good practice to keep your wife as happy as possible, or else, who knows, she might just go end up complaining about it to the police.